My name's Dave Embry. I do campus ministry at Missouri State in Springfield, Missouri. Work with some other campuses there. Our co-panelists, okay, I'll preside sort of, but these guys are the experts, so take it away.
No, that's not true.
Well, at least introduce yourself.
We're just here to support Dave today. That's really our reason for existence. Rob and Leah Schrump, when we work with students at Purdue University.
Where they're in the process of completing the ultimate campus ministry facility.
It's close.
Before we start on the topic, let me let me back up to people of a certain age. I've been doing campus ministry since 1978. All right, do the math. Yes, I'm obviously in my upper 40s. I'm a humanities guy. All right, but there used to be commercials on TV. An African-American man in a white suit sitting in a big chair. It was actually one of those peacock rattan chairs, who would hold up something and say, "This is a cola nut." And then he would hold up something that was half lemon and half lime and say, "This is an uncola nut. And this is what we use to make Sprite." Does anybody else here remember that commercial?
Oh, yeah.
You weren't even, okay, thank you, bless you. Bless you all. So what I want to mention this morning is an unworkshop, okay? Originally we anticipated that perhaps a number of students would come who were interested in campus ministry. And so a workshop was going to be held tomorrow about how to stay in campus ministry a long time. It was going to be a panel discussion. And I was supposed to be part of that. And I think that's a really valuable discussion because the number of people coming didn't actually, or the number of people anticipated did not actually sign up who were potentially going into campus ministry. As a veteran, and I think I qualify as a veteran now, if anyone wants to just chat about that topic at any point, please snag me. I think I know a few things. I've at least managed to stay. Now, just for those who are keeping score, here's what's happening with Dave. And for some of you, this is relevant, some of you not. I'm only going to be the director of our ministry one more year. We've worked out a succession plan, and I'll be on salary for another year, kind of wrapping things up. But then after a mere 45 years in 2023, they're taking me out to a trailhead and turning me loose, and I will become the feral geezer I've always dreamed of being. So that's my succession plan right there. All right, we are here today to talk about Generation Z, and I started doing campus ministry in 1978. The students were boomers. As a matter of fact, I was 22 years old. I had students in the ministry who were older than me. I grew my first beard to look older than my students. And now I was already married, Bible college couple, all that sort of thing. And my wife was preggers with her first child, and she was born within that first year. And I found out just in the last 5 years or so that there were students who had no idea how old we were, but figured we were much older than them because we were married and had a baby. Okay, that's how boomers thought. That's how Gen Z thinks too. If you're married and have a baby, you must be in your 30s, maybe 40s. So the boomers, gave way to the Xers, and the Xers gave way to the millennials. And now we got Generation Z, which has been in the news. Perhaps you've heard of them. You should have heard of them because they're here. They're who we've got. And, I'd been hearing about the rise of Generation Z and all that sort of thing, but it really hit me what a different generation it was. One night when we were at the inner city mission, homeless mission, that we've worked with since 1986, and we were redoing the floors in a overnight housing facility. And it was September, early in a school year, maybe 6 years ago. And I heard one of the students, actually for you from Missouri State, it was Easton Dunning, who said to a couple of the other students, hey, you guys, 9/11's coming up again. And everybody's all excited about it. Do any of you guys remember 9/11? And all the other students said, no. You know, we've seen the videos, we hear our parents talk about it, we don't have any idea. And then I knew we were in a really, really different generation. Just as a rough measure of Gen Z, I think that's a pretty good definition. Anybody who doesn't remember 9/11/01, and people born before 2016, that's when the demographers are saying the next generation starts. Alpha, they are. And what I can tell you about them right now, having a couple of grandchildren of that age, is they really, really like to play on cell phones and they love ice cream. So start planning for that right now. Which, for that matter, isn't that different from Generation Z. So what I want to talk about, and I've got some study guides that'll be available. I didn't bring it up for everybody. So if you want to email me or something, I can send you a digital version of this. And it's really not a good set of notes. It's just a lot of bullet points, essentially. But one of the things I note on here is that what we're going to do in the next couple of hours is not say, dang, Generation Z, why'd they get so screwed up and what can we possibly do about it? It is paradigmatic that through the years, each generation looks at the next one and says, or even more so, 2 or 3 down, if you've lived that long. Here's a quote from a wise man. I see no hope for the future of our people if they are dependent on the frivolous youth of today. For certainly all youth are reckless beyond words. When I was a boy, we were taught to be discreet and respectful of elders. But the present youth are exceedingly wise and impatient of restraint. That came from Hesiod in the 8th century BCE, okay? So this is a phenomenon of looking down that has continued, and you may have had some of those discussions with your own grandparents. Again, we are not here today to critique a generation. We're just going to share data, some of which you all know way better than me. I am an old guy. I like books. I am Facebook free and I still feel fine. Even better, I don't TikTok. You know, I'm a dinosaur, and the meteorite just missed me somehow. But we're going to talk about how the world has changed, and what is, rather than moaning what we might prefer. So there's some mysteries still about Gen Z. There's some things we know. I've done lots and lots of reading. I got some resources up here if you want to look through them, and there are way more. There's a pretty good bibliography, at least of books and a few websites in this handout that I have. But what they're saying, is that Gen Z is actually the biggest generation ever. And one estimate is that 30% of the Earth's population right now is Gen Z. And when you think that we are generally recognizing the presence of 5 generations, that's highly disproportional, especially as my parents' generation, one by one, slips away from us. But 30%, and the numbers are huge. That's who we've got in college right now. Having said that, last Friday I spent some time with the Associate Vice President of Enrollment Services at Missouri State. He's an alum of our ministry. I baptized him in '92, I think. And he says we are, however, approaching a demographic cliff. And I tried to log on this morning because I did not write down the exact date. And I had difficulty logging on here. No offense, Hotel. But I believe the year is 2025. It's either 2025 or 2026, where a number of high school graduates just kind of fall off a cliff. And that's why our university is going to whoop you guys in recruitment, because We're all going to be scrambling for a lessening piece of the pie. Couple of details here. In many cases, most cases even, Gen Z's parents are Gen Xers. And that may be somewhat significant when you look at the difference between millennials and Zers. And the millennials' parents were us, baby boomers. And some of the Xers' parents were us, baby boomers. You know, it gets fuzzy in there. But some of the ideas and ideals, especially that we boomers had, are kind of reflected in some of the millennials. Especially the, you know, dropout, hangout sort of nature. But many of the things that characterize Gen X are now showing up in Gen Z as well. It's not like they are clones of their parents by any means, but some of the same things are showing up. But one of the most interesting things that happened, where did Gen Z get their characteristics? Many of them came from things their parents did. Gen X was the beginning of the parent paparazzi, okay? That was the day, it was mentioned last night, of the video cameras that were like bricks or something. But these are the first guys to have every move of their lives recorded. And then even later, in many cases, those were uploaded. So they're much more documented, much more chronicled than previous generations. I'm not going to read through this whole thing because I want to give the folks who know way more what to do with Gen Zers than say I do plenty of time. But an interesting part of this whole mix is that 75% of Zers do not feel that college is the only way to make your mark in life, to move ahead and to succeed. 75% don't believe that. But 85% plan to go to college or have already been in college. Having said that, many of them who were in college over the last few years had a rough go, like the rest of us over the last few years, and they aren't sure if they want to go back to college. And so we're in a circumstance right now where nobody's quite sure what this fall is going to look like. Everybody's got their projections. But again, according to my friend, my colleague, Rob Hornberger, they're calling it a black swan event. You know, every now and then you get a black swan. It just happens, and things are weird, and nothing's normal. And that's what we got this year. On the basis of people's disappointments and so on, what's going to happen next, nobody quite knows. You guys from Springfield, I'm sorry you've heard this so many times, but people on our campus keep talking about back to normal, back to normal, back to normal for school, and they're taking down plexiglass, and they are taking the dots off the floors and the arrows saying, you know, these stairs are only up and these stairs are only down, back to normal. But normal for whom? For the freshmen, for the first years coming in, they have no idea what college is supposed to be like, and they've hated their last 2 years of high school. For the sophomores coming in, they've only had 1 year of college, and it was this last year, which was anything but normal. For the third year students, they had one semester where college kind of ran the way it had before, and then at various points of second semester, things locked down, they went home, they went online, and that's been the rest of their college experience. It's only people who've been around 4 years or longer who have any idea what quote unquote normal college life is like. Will that happen again? You know, without the momentum, will that happen again? Without the ongoing investment of previous generations? I don't know how you guys are thinking about things with Christian Campuses in Springfield. We've concluded we need to reinvent ourselves. We need to represent ourselves. We need to address the students on campus like they've never heard of campus ministry before, which is probably true even for the older ones. But also, we want to present for them a vision of what college life is like. Again, the standard they may be using is Animal House, so it's not too hard to vary from that. All right. Characteristics of Gen Z, we got a lot of them on this sheet. I'm just going to bullet point a few things. One of them is this. they consider themselves Gen Z, and I'm not saying these things critically. I've done a lot of research. Oh, okay. Another thing about me, I teach part-time in the Department of Religious Studies at our university. I never go in and say, hey, I'm Dave Embry, I'm a campus minister. Eventually they come to know that, but I just go in as somebody who cares about them. And they talk to me a lot. They tell me stuff. And so when I'm talking about Gen Z, I'm not looking through the filter of these are children who I want to know Jesus. I mean, I do want them to know Jesus, and they're resistant. I'm listening to raw data, okay? And they're unfiltered. One of the books we have here is a book from Tim Elmore called Generation Z Unfiltered. But just hang out with people who don't think you're a minister for a while, and they'll tell you a lot of stuff. So some of the conclusions in this come from my more direct research in that way. But one of the interesting elements of Gen Z, they consider themselves very realistic and honest. To the extent, as I was sharing with Rob and Leah last night, a guy I've met with for the last couple of years, he doesn't come to our ministry. We have worked through part of Mere Christianity together, and he really likes the apologetics part. He doesn't like the moral, here's how you ought to live stuff. But we were talking about this workshop and talking about people's perceptions of Gen Z. And he asked me, what are some perceptions people have of us? And I said, well, one is that perhaps you're a little unreliable and so on. For instance, a lot of my friends are employers and they'll hire Gen Zers and they'll come and work for one day and then they'll just never show up again. And he says, oh yeah. And I said, okay, so you don't see that as unreliable? And he goes, no. He says, we're just a lot more honest than any previous generation. And if we work a day and we know that's not going to make us happy, and we aren't going to really be able to invest in that, we just won't go back. He said, that's honesty. Okay. Interesting spin, but honest, realistic. Also interesting in the fact that all of us know that college students spend a lot of time online, and a lot of students spend a lot of time online polishing their images, polishing their personal brands. They realize, as all of us do, that much of who we are and much of who people perceive us to be is a result of the narratives that people believe about us. And, we've all got our own preferred narratives. Honestly, Matthew, I'll confess, the image you used of me to promote this workshop is my least favorite picture ever. It's the one that the university has on its website, and it may have migrated to our website too. I hate it. It just makes me look like a kid who's trying to look professional or something. Now, the one I like is me driving a Land Cruiser in Africa, okay? And if you look at our newly revised website, that's the image you'll see for Dave, is Dave driving a Land Cruiser. Why? That's who I think myself to be. The guy driving the Land Cruiser in Africa, not the guy sitting in a tweed jacket and looking academic or looking like he'd like to be academic or whatever. Okay, in the same way that I like that micro-narrative about myself, every student with whom we deal has their own internalized micro-narrative. But they're much more savvy social media-wise, and so they want to present that micro-narrative, that brand, every way they possibly can. Now, that creates some interesting things because that may not be actually much of who they are. And you guys have all heard the acronym FOMO, fear of missing out. A few years ago, another one came out that maybe you know, maybe you don't. It's FOMIRL, F-O-M-I-R-L, which stands for the fear of meeting in real life. And one of the fears about meeting in real life is people may see that your carefully curated micro-narrative is not true, is not really much of who you are. And again, in talking to my students at the university, I found out that that's one of the reasons some of them are so reluctant to actually go to their classes. There might be people in their classes they only know online, and that might reveal them to be somebody other than who they have promoted themselves to be. Now, what you might hear in my little narrative here is that this distances people from one another. I don't want you to get too close. I don't want you to know who I really am. Man, I'm talking too long. I'm so sorry. Let me hit a few bullet points here. In talking to students and reading the literature, Gen Z is self-identifying as very financially motivated. Sort of surprised me. Whereas millennials even said, I want to do something meaningful with my job, even if it means less money. Gen Z is saying, I just want to make money. I'm not finding my meaning in work. I'll find my meaning elsewhere. They are very entrepreneurial. 58% want to own their own businesses. 14% already do. Oh, sheesh. Tim Elmore. Some of you remember Tim from the Ivy Jungle conferences that we used to have. Those were really enjoyable. For a long time, Tim Elmore has been talking about artificial maturity. He wrote a book by that title, in which he said one of the characteristics of this generation is people see them doing tech things and go, man, those guys are smart. Look at them. They can do all this stuff. And they can't. You know, again, back to my 3- and 6-year-old grandchildren. They can do amazing things with an iPhone. But the other side of that is they don't know how to handle a dispute with anybody. They don't know how to talk to their own grandparents. They don't know how to navigate the interpersonal relationships that are face-to-face, although they long for face-to-face relationships. And the Annie E. Kesey Foundation has called Gen Z the loneliest generation. And one of the reasons for that is they fall prey to the social media trap, here's the actual phrase, of compare and despair. They are worried. They are anxious. They feel, especially on the basis of the last year, postponed and penalized. Let me say just a couple more things before turning it over to kind of what can we do about this? One of the most important things to recognize, and some of you are going to go, well, duh, Dave, we know this. And again, I'll recommend Tim Elmore's book, a different book, Marching Off the Map. Gen Z is our first generation of digital natives. And you're like, yeah, we all know that. No. Think about the term digital natives. That doesn't just mean they like the internet. That doesn't just mean they're skilled with technology. The internet is their hometown. I grew up in a small town in northeast Missouri, and I still, in many ways, feel more comfortable there and more accepted there and more at home there than any place else. That's Gen Z. They turn to the web, they turn to social media for affirmation, they turn to social media for understanding. This is the first generation that has no real need of adults to derive information. Things they used to ask their parents, they ask Siri, they ask Google. And the idea that there is a certain amount then of a phrase I learned a while back, inappropriate competence extrapolation. Because they don't need help to derive information, they often don't believe they need help interpreting information. They don't need help sorting through options. Inappropriate competence extrapolation. I know how to use Google. Okay, boomer. See ya. You know, that's kind of the end of the story. Skip. I don't know if you're familiar with the term phygital, P-H-I-G-I-T-A-L. Phygital. I just came up with it in my research. It's a blending of the two terms physical and digital, and it represents the blurring of the differences between the physical and digital worlds for Gen Z. You just morph from one to the other, and there's very little difference in perception, especially of reality or authority, or to a certain extent, connection. We talk about this generation being really, really connected, and yet when it comes to face-to-face, which again, all the studies show that they prefer, there's reluctance. There's reluctance to expose too much. Skip. And then came COVID, okay? Another name, well, some people are calling post-COVID, if we're post-COVID, mid-post-COVID Gen Zers, Gen CZ. Other people are calling them coronials. I kind of like that. But once again, they feel exceptionally disappointed, as do all of us, in what's happened over the last year and a half, but also more vulnerable. Where have the adults in their lives been? Why did this happen? Why has everything turned out so badly? Why am I even more depressed than I was before? Now, the one thing that is encouraging to those of us who work on brick and mortar campuses is that even though for the last 20 or 30 years now people have been saying the brick and mortar campus is dead, everybody's going to do everything online, we now know that students don't even want to do that. We know that students long to get out of the room. Students long to not, even though they're very adept at Zoom and Meet and Skype and all the other things, they're tired of it. They want to go back to the classroom. Let's talk momentarily about quote unquote religion, since that's something all of us I think are interested in. In my in the introduction to my Introduction to Religion class, I always ask a number of questions to get people thinking about the very idea of religion. And probably for the last 5 or 6 years, the first day, every first day of that class, somebody says, we aren't like old people. We think differently. And so when it comes to thinking about matters of faith, Gen Zers really see the stratification between older generations and themselves and put themselves in a different category. I'm going to say something that sounds really harsh, but I've come to believe it's true. Especially since the last election cycle, may it never ever come back around, many Gen Zers see the term evangelical Christian in much the same way they see the term child molester. Okay, well, let that sink in. The same emotional impact, the same splankna sort of response. Child molester. Evangelicals, that's who we are. That's how we define our faith. Well, only them define, less than 5% define their faith as evangelical Christian. So the main standard, of course, with which they've grown up, thank you Disney, is follow your heart, follow your heart, follow your heart. And anything else seems to be oppressive. And oppressive is one of the mantras. We can't do that. Faith in God, following Jesus, seen as one of many potential personal preferences one might make about religion, which then becomes part of your micro-narrative. The bigger question than the truthfulness of the gospel is, what's it going to do to my life? What's it going to do to my interactions with others, my reputation? Without adequate relationship, conversations about faith seem to be superficial exercises in identity formation. It's a direct quote from somebody smarter than me. Without adequate relationship, conversations about faith seem to be superficial exercises in identity formation. Much like, wait, you've got a Cubs sticker on your car? What are you thinking? It's totally personal preference. Accepting the gospel has always been costly in every way. And the idea of deny yourself, cancel your personal micro-narrative, take up your cross and assume, quote unquote, somebody else's narrative is really, really a tough thing. And yet, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one God. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. These commands that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. That's our mandate for our physical and spiritual children. As we're talking to people who get 10,000 messages a day that they got to sort through and decide what's going to have validity and impact on their lives. That was way longer than 10 minutes.
Hey, it's good stuff. Good stuff. I want to press into a couple of those things, and then part of this whole workshop is what does reaching this generation actually look like? And so I want to spend some time there as well. Leah found an article in Psychology Today by a guy named Ross O'Hara, and basically kind of summarizes Dave's document here in 3 or 4 phrases. But he starts with the phrase, this generation is a fascinating blend of contradictions. And then he highlights 3 or 4 of those contradictions. And Dave has mentioned them. They are motivated by money. I mean, they witnessed the recession. It's a period of income inequality. They've seen millennials strapped by debt. And so they are motivated by money, not to make a bunch of money, but to have stability. But he said, however, they are also motivated to change the world. And they have started businesses. I have talked to some of our students coming in as a freshman who have already started 2 businesses and created an app and have a whole side portfolio going in the midst of their classes, and it just astounds me. They don't want to just volunteer. They want to go to the core of the issue and deal with the core of the issue. There's Corey C. Miller, she's a professor. She has a TED Talk on Generation Z, and she talked about for years, first day of class, she's done this syllabus. I forget what class she teaches, but it's her freshman class. And she says, if you want to pick up some extra credit, you can volunteer 10 hours a week. 10 hours over the course of the semester. And this girl raised her hand and said, does my not-for-profit qualify instead of volunteering? And the professor was kind of taken back, and she said, yeah, of course. Is there anybody else in that boat? And all of these hands shot up, right? And so there is this, what are we going to do about the actual problems and issues? I don't want to just volunteer, which gets into another piece of it where originality is incredibly important. Every year, I get students in my office saying, I've got this brand new idea, and I have to kind of absorb that because I don't want to offend them with the fact that for the last 33 years, I've had that same conversation and we've had that same event, but they want to be the originators of those. They want to have the entrepreneurial spirit. So they're motivated by money, but in terms of stability, however, they want to make a difference in the world. They are also digital natives, 3+ hours a day on their screens. But, however, being a phone zombie is not their preference. And 83% prefer face-to-face communications, but Dave picked up on the fact that they don't know how. And so we see them retreat to their screens. They value education, but they see that education as a connection to get them to their goals, right? However, having a BS from a university is not their only option. They are risk and debt averse. And so Purdue actually has created pathways to finish your degree in 3 years in light of that fact. So, and then finally, there are challenges with mental health, higher levels of worry and anxiety and depression, lots of pressure to not let people down. And there is no however. That's what the article said. There's no however there. So I'd love you to kind of press into that mental health bit of what you're seeing.
Yeah, I don't know how many of you are noticing sort of with this next generation, but we have a mental health crisis. Are you seeing that on your campuses as well? Yeah, and well, first I'd just like to even start with I don't know what I bring to this conversation, but what keeps being pressed on my heart is our posture toward this generation. And so I think we can study them and we can talk about them, but I think what matters just as much as what we know about them is our posture toward them, just as our posture toward any people group that we might define as different from ourselves or that we might generalize with some kind of stereotype, to remember that these are individuals and to remember that they have an experience in the world, and to have some compassion for what that experience is. I think often we look at this generation and we can say, well, they're just so fragile, or they're so incompetent at certain things, or they're so fragile, or they're unable to have a conversation, or they call the police to deal with, their lunch meat situation with their roommate because their roommate ate their lunch meat. They don't know how to solve it, so they call the cops and ask the cops to come and help them sort it out. Right? Like we see that's a true story at Purdue University. We see some of the frailties, and sometimes I think, especially Gen Xers and Boomers, we can be a little bit hard on Gen Zers because of how frail they seem, right? The smallest thing seems to dysregulate them. And we're like, well, just get a thick skin, just toughen up. What's wrong with you? I think we have to, for those of us who are a little bit older, I think we have to recognize that this generation has come to be the way that they are because of the context that was set before them, right? Which was our responsibility. So I think before we come at them with criticism, it's important for us to have a posture of some compassion and understanding, and also curiosity about how they have come to be the way that they have. Also recognizing that the world is full of all sorts of trauma. For some of us, coming to recognize the racial trauma that's been a part of our history all along, but we're coming to see that. Maybe some of us white folk are coming to see that a little differently now, coming to acknowledge that. But trauma comes in a lot of different forms. And trauma in the world, Vietnam, there was some trauma there. There's a lot of trauma there. World War II, there's a lot of trauma there. We can look at that and we can say, wars are trauma. But there's so much other trauma in our context. And trauma can look like bad things that are present, terrible things, loss, grief, violence, abuse. Trauma can also look like the absence of good things. And I think a lot of our conversation with mental health is around both of those. But what gets missed in our own stories and in the stories of those that we look at is often the type A trauma, which is the absence of good things, right? So what we know about babies when they come into the world is that they're looking for someone to see them. They're looking for their face reflected in the face of another. Babies are born into the world with a need for socialization. They're born into the world to be nurtured, to be cared for, to be seen, to be attuned to, for what they're feeling to be felt by their caregiver, for their caregiver to respond to them in real time, for their needs to be met. We are social beings, and our brains are formed neurobiologically, socially. So when we consider the fact that generations, and now my generation, we are parenting more disconnected than we've been before in many ways. Screens are parenting our children. What's happening neurobiologically to those kids who were created in the image of God to be in community and to see their faces reflected in the faces of their parents, but they're getting screens instead, right? And so what's happening just in the very wirings of the prefrontal cortex for trust, for relationship, for security, if those things aren't met in the first 2 to 5 years, fairly consistently, parents don't have to get it perfect, just even get it right 50% of the time, and a kid can be securely attached in their wiring. But where that's not happening, and there's insecure attachment, and there's difficulty regulating emotion, then we find that when our roommate takes our bologna sandwich, we can't handle it, right? And we don't know what to do because we haven't experienced that kind of relationship and that kind of coaching throughout. So I guess I just want to say this is they look like a fairly vulnerable generation. Also recognizing that maybe there are particular vulnerabilities in this generation. one thing we're learning about trauma, and I'm going to be a big advocate for pastors, church people to become trauma informed. Not that we all have to become therapists and counselors, but I think we're living in a world where trauma, there is so much trauma, and we know that whatever it doesn't get transformed gets transmitted. And when you think about that happening, it really happens exponentially, right? Generationally, it becomes an exponential thing. And so I think for us as pastors, parents, it's helpful if we can come to understand how trauma begets other trauma, what healing looks like, and even for us to experience healing in our own stories with Jesus and in the context of healthy relationships with others, so that we are equipped and prepared to be communities of church belonging, where we can come around others, where others who are struggling and hurting can come in and be a part of being reparented in the family of God, right? Where we are brothers and sisters and moms and dads to one another in a way where there can be a context for some healing, because the isolation is part of the fracturing. And it really, I think, is in the context of community that the integration of the mind and of community works its way in the healing. So one of the resources that I use to learn about trauma is called The Place We Find Ourselves. It's a podcast. I don't know if you've heard of it. Adam Young is the podcaster. He's out of the Allender Center and LCSW. But it's a gospel-centered approach. There's a lot of neuroscience that's a part of that. It's kind of where the intersection of neuroscience and gospel and our own stories. And I would recommend that just to begin to get, if you're not trauma informed, recommend that as a place to start to learn some things. Because I think this generation is, well, I struggle with my own mental health, right? This isn't just the next generation. I have my own story with PTSD and anxiety and depression and OCD, and also I could give you a whole list of letters. And the Lord has been doing a work in my life to bring me healing and hope in all of that. But this generation, I think we're noticing with the fracture and with the screens and with the and then the COVID isolation, right? You said they were already depressed and now they're more depressed, and they're sort of looking to where's the help, where's the hope, where's the healing? But I'm not sure that they naturally trust us. And so I think one of the questions that I have for us in campus ministry is, what does it look like to understand how they're coming in and why they're coming in that way, and then how do we meet them relationally with the hope of the gospel, right? One thing that feels particularly tender to me, and I apologize if this is a triggering analogy, because I realize that some of us have experienced sexual abuse, and that's a horrible thing, and I want to be compassionate about that. But one of the things that I think we have to think about a lot as church people, who are those evangelicals whose category elicits the same kind of visceral response as child molester to this generation, is as we're thinking as church people about what it is to reach these people, this generation, and we study them and we learn all about them, I would like for us to think about a self kind of check a little bit, so that as we're thinking about reaching them, are we thinking about reaching them with the gospel? Are we thinking about reaching them with the hope of Jesus? Or are we thinking about reaching them so that we can commodify them and make our numbers bigger? One is loving. The other is violence. That's a strong word, but I'm going to use it because it's violence. And it's not different, honestly. It's not different from what a sexual predator does, who studies a child, recognizes what they need, comes in to bring them exactly what they need so that they can exploit them. So can we be thoughtful? Can we be prayerful? Can we be compassionate and kind? And can we be fluent and internalize the gospel in our own lives in such a way that it's good news, where we long to bring others into that good news, rather than trying to build some kingdom of numbers and commodifying students to meet those numbers? So those are the things that are on my heart. Strong words.
Yeah, thank you. Another book that has been really helpful to us, not the best written book, but Brilliant People, Living from the Heart Jesus Gave You. And it's the folks that developed the life model. And so one thing that really strikes me, not just talking about mental health and trauma with this generation, but also the need for spiritual families. And I think that is such a craving need of this generation. For one thing, they're coming from really screwed up families. And so if it's business as usual and let's get our programs up and going, and we had a whole file on our old computer of what we did last year, and we would update it, and it's like, okay, we've got that fall retreat. Who's doing the hot dog buns? And it's like, can we just clear the way to really be more inventive, but also more in tune with the felt chronic needs of the students that we are dealing with. And what they need is family. What they need is a sense of belonging. They need spiritual moms and dads and brothers and sisters. And so not that programs are evil, but we cannot be leading with programs. It's life-on-life discipleship, and it is actually loving people toward Jesus so that they can encounter him in transformative ways. And so if we can move from information-based to transformation, then I think we're on the right track. A couple of things that I've been reading just in prepping for today. That article in Psychology Today goes on and says, what can we do, right? And so looking at first generation college students is one, what are some best practices? And so I wanted to read, there's just 4 bullet points, but I think there's like a kingdom component to each of these that's really cool. These are ingredients learned to apply. First generation students perform better when a college education is framed around improving the world, not just improving oneself. That there is, on the one hand, there is this self-focus, but the desire is to actually make a dent in the world. And so to what the beauty of church, the beauty of campus ministry is that it is a collective, that it is bringing people into a family on mission. Second thing about first gen college students that is helpful is utility value interventions, helping them draw connections between their courses and their future careers. The big why I'm never going to use this, right? Why am I in this class? And to help them draw connections to how this benefits them somewhere down the road. And so that gets into really kingdom vocations. And it's like, what does faith and work? What is a theology of good work? And how can we help them really encapsulate the gospel in that algebra course? And so to help them make those connections. Self-affirmation exercises that differ against identity threat and fear of failure and judgment. Identity it's tied to the mental health crisis, but it is deeply embedded into every human. And so, who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? What's this all about? The gospel speaks into every one of those questions. And so, identity in Christ, that you are loved and delighted in by the God of the universe, that is the starting point. And so, how does their identity get framed within the context of the gospel? And finally, exercises, their recommendations are exercises like advice giving or expressive writing, helping to deal with social belonging and bias, helping Gen Z students cope with worry and anxiety. Really, the larger, more expansive thing that we have to offer is life with Jesus. That it is belonging, an expressed life of discipleship and story work and life-on-life discipleship. So I thought that was kind of cool that there is this quote-unquote secular approach to how can we really help reach college students. And so all of that has truth and merit, but the gospel presents a more expansive articulation of that. Really quickly, the other thing I thought was kind of interesting was there's a guy named Mel Walker who has an organization called Vision for Youth. And he had 5 points of treating Gen Z as an unreached people group that I thought was interesting. This is the rise of the nones. We've all read those articles and heard those statistics. But to treat Gen Z as an unreached people group, go to them instead of asking them to come to you. Number 2, find creative ways to share the gospel and biblical truth instead of ways to entertain. They are entertained to death. They don't want entertainment. They want something real and transcendent. Number 3, adapt strategies for cultural impact instead of accepting traditional norms of ministry. We have got to get beyond what worked 10 years ago. Expect opposition instead of believing that most people will want to hear what we say. The gospel, Dave said this earlier, the gospel is offensive because it says that you cannot accomplish this on your own, that your own happiness is not what matters most in this universe. That's offensive. That's offensive to every human, but especially to this generation. So we can kind of go in knowing that the gospel is offensive. Let's not add to that offense by our own stupidity. Finally, prioritize and utilize team ministry instead of thinking that ministry is for individuals. That gets back to the desire, a felt need for family. And we're going to talk more about this in our workshop this afternoon, but getting to more the word polycentric leadership, where we have everybody bringing their own gifts and their own heart for Jesus to the table instead of a hierarchical type structure. It is exactly, and the same thing applies to the students that we work with. I mean, they are gifted. They have great ideas. They just might be a whole lot smarter than we are. And so to empower and unleash them at the same time that we are trying to reach them in their deepest needs and bring them to the wholeness of Jesus. So just a couple of more practical, I guess, comments on how to reach. But do you have anything else you wanted to add?
Maybe it's just because this isn't my natural bent, but I just keep feeling like the Holy Spirit just keeps pressing on my heart humility, which isn't that's just not my natural go-to. And I know as we talked with Dave last night, he was sharing a lot of just his interactions with students, and what I was hearing from the way he engages students is just the way he positions himself to do a lot of listening. And I think there's something of humility in that. My natural bent is to look at something, see where it's wrong, and then come in with correction. I'm a lot higher challenge. Maybe you've picked that up already. Come in with some challenge, come in with some correction. That's where it's broken. Let's fix it. You're thinking wrongly. Here's how to think rightly. And I just am not sure that that's the way forward. And I think there's something of humility, of listening, of getting to know students, hearing their stories, hearing where they're coming from, hearing why they think the way they do, why they feel the way they do, that helps us engage them with a sense of understanding. I think when we come in the way I tend to want to come in, with just a bunch of kind of prescriptive, here's how it should be, here's what you should think, here's what you should do, we likely we're not even hearing what's actually happening, right? We have this idea of what we think about them, but we don't actually know them. And so I think there's something of that that's key. Also just, I think, recognizing, this is true of Gen Zers or anyone else, but where do we see in these students, in anyone, the image of God? Like when we look at them, what is it that this generation bears that images God? Where are they naturally bent, because they're created in His image, to want to bring things that look like the kingdom? And how do we spot those things and bless those things? Right? Where do we say, that looks something like Jesus? Can I hear more about that? How can I come around you? How can we do this together? Several years ago, we lived in our last house. We had some neighbors who lived beside us, and they were not Jesus followers, pretty anti-Jesus, actually pretty angry toward the church. But they began to love us, and we began to engage them, and together we were caring for an elderly neighbor as he was preparing to die. And I can't remember what transpired, but you said something to our friend Lynn, who is not a Jesus lover at all. Wow, Lynn, the way that you care for Virgil, it just looks a lot like Jesus. And her response, pardon my language, was, well, shit, if I'd known that, I wouldn't have done it. But she was just kind of like, she didn't know what to do quite with that, right? But he was trying to paint a picture of, here's where I see you've been made in the image of God. There's something of the way you love that looks like Jesus here. And maybe Jesus doesn't look like what you think he looks like, right? Maybe God is different from who you think he is. And so I think there's something of that with this generation, of noticing, where are they now? I mean, they want to make the world a better place. They really do. Now, their ideas of what that looks like, what is wisdom and what is right and true and what love is, need to be shaped but that's going to be shaped in relationship with Jesus, right? And so if we can encourage them to know Jesus and listen to Jesus, encourage a secure relationship with Jesus, then I think that's the kingdom work comes to flow out of that. So there may be things that we spot that there will be things in this generation that we spot that are needs. They have a longing and need for connection and identity. How does the very real and very practical, very lived gospel meet those very real needs? I think is the question. That's all I have to add.
We have this timed down to the second, so please forgive us our strict order. Let me just share a couple more things, then we're going to open it up for discussion. And what we're especially interested in is what works. And again, not in the sense of how do we get more butts into seats, but what are some of the things that you're finding enables you to connect, enables you to love more specifically, and enables you to draw people towards Jesus? Just another quote from Tim Elmore, who I liked him a lot. He says, "Are we approaching a Netflix generation of students with a blockbuster style of leadership?" And I think in some cases that's true. Again, bring out the old retreat schedule. Let's stick in some vegan hot dogs this year. We'll do the same thing. Although I would, this is not something I intended to say, but back to something Rob says. We got to begin everything we do at every level of the process. We have to start with why. When we're talking to students, we got to start with why. But when we're talking with our staff about the next year, we got to start with why. Why are we doing campus ministry? Why are we going to hold that party? Why? What is the point? Where are we going with it? Of the various books I've got, and I didn't bring all of them by any means, many of you have read some of the Barna stuff. Like Unchurched and so on, and those are good. They're all valuable. but they can be really, really depressing. You lost me. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for the reminder. But one of the most hopeful ones is Faith for Exiles with David Kinnaman and Mark Matlock. And one of the things that we have, our staff has kind of gravitated towards that book because towards the end, they offer 5 really objective suggestions. And I've put together a little seminar I've been taking out to churches. And by the way, churches are starving for this stuff. Churches, and again, part of it may just be how do we keep the bodies here, but we got to start someplace with them. And if that's where they want to start, we can take them further. I'm down with that. But I'm calling it our next faithful generation. And I've done it, I don't know, in a dozen churches or so. And I conclude with these suggestions. To form a resilient identity in Gen Zers, or us for that matter, this all applies to every generation, we must experience intimacy with Jesus. It's not about programs, it's intimacy with Jesus, who didn't say, sit down there and listen to me. He said, follow me. Let's go. Let's do stuff.
Come and see.
Yeah, let me show you what this God life looks like. This is flourishing. This is what Eden was supposed to be like, Come with me, let's go bless people. Okay, so to form a resilient identity, experience intimacy with Jesus. Second, in a complex and anxious age, who can doubt that, we got to develop the muscles of cultural discernment. And again, even though all our students have Google access to any tidbit of knowledge, then what? What do you do with that? How does that intersect with life? How does that intersect with past, future, present? Number 3, when isolation and mistrust are the norms, we need to form meaningful intergenerational relationships. I'm going to push pause on this list for a second because we have an incredibly unique opportunity here post-COVID, wherever we are in the COVID process. For the first time since World War II, virtually everybody in America has had the same experience. Okay? Whereas social media is very age stratified, where people who consume the same media interact with each other around the world. I mean, a 16-year-old in Japan who plays the same video games, that my grandkids play, they have more in common than either of them do with their own grandparents, okay? But we've got COVID, okay? Now, it's been a terrible thing. It's been a tragic thing. But it actually provides a point at which we can share, we can empathize, we can share common stories. We have a common starting place more so than we've had for, 70 years. To say, I mean, never stress the I know exactly how you feel, but been there. We start at the same place. Okay. Meaningful intergenerational relationships in the church, in the campus ministry, very important. To ground and motivate an ambitious generation, train for vocational discipleship. This goes back to the whole, why am I in college? What am I doing with this stuff? Because God wants you in that algebra class, maybe. Curb entitlement and self-centered tendencies by engaging in mission. And this is the hard part. This is another one of those tensions within Gen Z. They want to change the world. They don't want to do busy work. They want to do some things that matter, but they're really tired of doing service hours. Service hours are in college that the classes impose upon them are often seen as just something else they got to do to get the grade, to get the degree, to get the job, to get the money, as opposed to here's a way to serve others. So even when we're inviting people to serve with us, we really, really, really got to stress it in terms of blessing and in terms of, again, to use the term flourishing. I don't know, that stimulate anything else that you want to say before we toss it open?
Just off of that, I think not to underestimate this generation. I've been meeting with 4 guys this past semester who each of them really have a heart for ministry and just, deep, compassionate love for people and just get it, But they're also really young and vibrant, and there is, they're just not inhibited, and I love that. And so one of them, his name's Joe, and he is traveling around the country with a group of 20s, college students in a van, and they're going from city to city, and they're like leading worship 6 nights a week, and they're partnering with local missions and ministries, and they just get to a city and they say, what's Jesus doing here? How can we contribute? And some crazy stuff. I mean, they went into kind of a new age shop. A woman had, witchcraft stuff and new age stuff, and they led her to the Lord. She literally burned all of her stuff in her shop because she didn't want to sell that to someone else to perpetuate it. And so he texted me 2 weeks ago and said, you're not going to believe this, but this is Acts 9 stuff happening, and seeing people healed, and just they don't have, these 4 guys in particular don't have the filter of God doesn't do that anymore. I need that. I need that. I can get really jaded. I get really tired. I've been doing this for 33 years, and so I need that vibrancy. I need to be reminded that God is still doing miraculous stuff, and I want to be a part of that. So, sorry. Don't underestimate.
And as we open this up and want you to share, and are we recording this or something? So I guess we'll repeat questions or comments so that it'll be on the tape, CD, MP3, brain plant,
Eight-track.
whatever they're doing. But what Rob's saying is, we really, this idea of coming alongside people really isn't, okay, we'll take the little losers by the hand, but really coming alongside. They is us, and us is they, or that's how the kingdom of God's supposed to work, right? Parts of the body aren't supposed to prioritize and all that sort of thing. So coming alongside and being the body together despite ages, and that takes a little work. So work, what is working? What are some of the things that you all have found especially effective? Of course, one of the big issues given the past year is connection. How do we connect with people who've been wearing masks and social distancing, and we're already predisposed towards staying in the rooms because that's where all their stuff is, and turning to Netflix and do you know any students who can't tell you which show they watched a whole season of this week? How do we connect? What's working? What are you finding helpful?
Dave, what we found very helpful was the fact that our building was open. Students could come and meet, spread out in our building. They didn't have to wear masks. And we deliberately resisted a culture of fear and panic.
Okay.
And my concern has been over the past year, because a common theme I hear about all 3 of you is the importance of face-to-face, personal connection, community, family, brothers and sisters. You can't do that over screens. But yet the church has been riven by fear and panic.
Mark Pike is speaking for those of you out there in digital land, and talking about how through the last year with COVID, one of the most significant things they did was simply have their facilities open as a place for people to go and feel safe. And they could be spread out in the facility unmasked and so on and have real interactions with other people. One of the interesting elements of this last year, and of course I've had plenty of political discussions with various people about what really has been going on or really hasn't been going on. And I think we are all reluctant even still to say 15 months ago, we didn't have a clue. I mean, I didn't have a clue, you didn't have a clue, Dr. Fauci didn't have a clue. You know, there's just this thing that's infecting people and killing people. I mean, within 3 weeks of the lockdown, an elder in one of our local churches passed away. And we didn't get to have a memorial service for 8 months until people were feeling safe. So that really sense of the unknown.
It reminded me of when I was young, a few decades ago, and had children, and I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
We're handed our firstborn son. We were not experienced parents. We didn't know what we were doing, and we did not panic.
Yeah.
We figured it out. I am concerned that as the Christian community, that we're losing our ability to figure it out and not panic. I agree with you. We didn't know what we were doing a year and a half ago. We didn't know what we were facing. But in a lot of cases, we panicked. That theme came up in our conversations with student leaders, and, you know, we're going to figure this out, but we're not going to panic.
Yeah.
We're going to be doing it differently. It's not the same, right? But my concern is, as leaders, where were we?
Okay, and
That's my question.
that's a lot to repeat. Should we pass around another microphone or something, or?
I was just going to say, I've got this, if anybody...
All right, so for future comments and so on, we'll pass around the microphone. This will be just like the old talk shows on TV, yes.
All of you who remember Donahue.
Can I add to that just for a second? Purdue had a lot of what they would deem success this year in terms of their policies and procedures. They had
The university.
the university, yeah. They had 6,000 of the 40,000 students that actually had tested positive throughout the year. But only 28 of those were hospitalized, and only 14 of those were actually hospitalized in Greater Lafayette. And so that they really tried to meet those markers. They were very vigilant with Protect Purdue. And I was incredibly impressed with the students. You walk across campus and they are masked up, and they did have, I think they had this mentality that I'm not just going to push my own individual rights, that I'm actually part of a collective here. And so we tucked under Purdue's policy because we are part of that community, and we want to be a blessing and help Purdue flourish. And so the question for us that we kept posing to our students was, what does love require? Not what are our rights, and not what can we do technically and legally, but what does love require in this moment? And there's not a, that takes a layer of thoughtfulness, and that's not necessarily a pat answer in every situation, but that introduced our students to the fact that the way of Jesus and his kingdom is costly. And what does that cost entail in terms of being a part of Jesus' kingdom in the midst of this kingdom that is our campus and our country and our world right now. So that's just a little bit different take on that. But
And since I have the mic, I'm going to jump in and comment a little bit too. I think our students really sense that idea of we're helping, that you were talking about, they want to help the world, not just help themselves. And I think in this pandemic, our students really got that. It wasn't so much fear as it was, what can I do to be safe for everyone? We did a combination. We did that hybrid thing where we had our large group meetings on Zoom. And it was very interactive, so everybody would get on there. Like when we first shut down in 2020, at the end of that first semester or spring semester, it was more us presenting, us in front of a camera, them watching. When we got to fall last year, we thought this has got to be different. It's got to be more interactive, and so we went full Zoom with all 40-some faces or 50-some faces, or however many people were on there, and students would get on and lead, communion, or they would get on and lead a prayer time, and then we would have the message. They would click a YouTube link. But what we found was we thought it would be really hard to have connection, and we found an unexpected boon in that we had these breakout rooms, and we would put students after the sermon into breakout rooms to talk, and that wouldn't necessarily be with the people they would usually come to church and sit with. And so we found we had more people talking with more other people and getting to know them. And then the hybrid part is we had our small groups where people would still be able to get together in our building, spread out with masks on, and have personal interaction. And so we found in some ways our personal connection increased because when they would come to church on Sunday and we would have a sermon, they would then get up with their friends and they would leave. We had a lot more interaction than we expected because of that hybrid situation. We are excited to get back face to face, and I think our students are excited to do that. But I think we found a little nugget of gold in the midst of that worked well for this idea of connecting and gave them a way. Again, I think our students saw it not so much as fear, but very much this is how we can be safe for everyone. This is how we can help. And I think they enjoyed the few times we got together in the parking lot and did some worship out in the open air, but they were by no means upset with the year. So I'm going to, anybody who wants...
One thing real quick?
Yeah.
I don't know if you need me to come over there.
You can all walk to me since I have a bad knee. You can.
I need to use the mic. So I just want to, I agree with you, Rob, 100% in terms of the two themes of thinking about people in terms of community and family and brothers and sisters. We need to be thinking about that. But I really liked what you said about being thoughtful. And I think that's what we need to bring into our ministry, is being thoughtful and understanding the dynamics of what's going on, which I think you expressed well just now. My concern has been there's a lot of people in the church and in families and in our culture that they were not thoughtful at all. And so I think that's where something what Matthew just described, or whatever we end up doing, are we demonstrating as pastors and Christian leaders thoughtful leadership and pastoring, or are we just reacting?
right,
And I think that's the key that I think was missing in some quarters.
yeah,
So
that's good.
Who else? Go ahead, please.
So back to the thing of what worked. For me personally, this was my first year at a new university as well. So I connected really well with the freshmen, actually, I don't know what's normal either. Can't wait to figure it out together, and so that was kind of nice, but something to take the edge off of the freshmen. Like I had a group of freshman girls that I saw a couple of more outgoing ones in the group, and I was like, I can connect with them for sure. We have that in common. And so I'd go up to the group and I asked them if they all wanted to join a Bible study with me together rather than singling one out. I think that was more comfortable for them. They're like, well, we have a roommate that hasn't been coming. I'm like, well, will you invite her? And they're like, well, yeah, okay. And so just like that, ripple effect. and me personally, we just went to my apartment. We opened up our home and had them in, and again with like these skills that are maybe lacking or just aren't quite polished yet, like confrontation. That's really difficult for everyone, but a lot of texts, and I saw this on this platform of social media, and I saw this, and I said, okay, you know what? How do you guys feel about sitting down and just talking together? Because this is all of us together. This is our group that this is happening with. How can we talk this out? And there were moments where I was the mediator, but it was good because we learned, confrontation, and I learned more about them, and I learned, okay, I'll remember that for later. Like, I shouldn't speak to you in this way. And so it really was like a joint effort. It wasn't, I feel like with this situation, there was a good blend of, okay, I'm going to meet you where you're at, of like, okay, I recognize that like you are different than me, even though I'm not that much older than them yet. But like okay, there are some differences here. However, I would like for you to challenge these things and learn how to have a conversation and how to figure out this conflict management without just getting angry and just sitting there. And so that's what worked, I think, is just that, like, not singling out, because there is that face-to-face and they desperately wanted that, but like inviting as a group and then just keeping that going. But there's also definitely a time and place for challenge, as we all know. We're all changing all the time, hopefully, right? So that's what worked for me specifically, and I'm excited to see like how me and the freshmen, figure it out together of what ministry here looks like.
Very good.
Hi, I'm one of the few students that is here. And my roommate and I both served on the leadership team with our campus ministry. And we have an apartment, and over this past year, we found there was power of inviting students into our home, and the impact that, like Hannah was saying, of having a group of freshmen into your home. Like, my roommate and I, we taught them to cook a meal because they were like, we don't know how to cook. All we know is how to warm up something in the microwave. And so we were able to teach them how to cook a meal, and then in our small apartment have those deep life Jesus conversations with them. And just, that was one of my favorite things over this past year, is we couldn't gather together in large groups on campus. And so we were like, let's bring them to, like, let's invite them into our home. And they desperately needed that, because as they're away, especially the freshmen, as this is all new and it's not normal, what is normal? But they needed that deep connection, and they long for it. They long to be heard and listened to. So it was just really cool to have students as a fellow student into my home to share life with them.
It sounds like you were discipling them in hospitality.
And again, back to the biblical pattern,
Yeah.
hospitality, hospitality, hospitality. Thanks, Paul says to the women who have the church in their home. And
My name is Mitchell. I'm actually a pastor, but I've had the chance to work with young adults and college students, and so talking about what worked last year in May. So I'm in Illinois. We had one of the more severe shutdowns, so May, everything was still completely shut down. And so I had about 5 college students, and then one of the college students' younger sister, who was 12. The 7 of us got together and read through the Bible in a month. Because my challenge to them was, if you say that you follow Christ and that you believe the Bible, have you actually read the entire Bible? So we got a plan together, went through the whole Bible in 31 days. We met once a week and we talked about all the things, all the questions we had, all the things that kind of stood out to us. And all 7 of us got through the Bible in a month, including the 12-year-old, and had the chance just to grow and start to go, okay, when we go back after this, what do we want to go back and study in the Bible, and what do we want to continue developing in our own faith? it kind of leans into what you guys talked about. What's a meaningful challenge or something meaningful to do? And so for these students, it was, if I say I believe this, do I know what's in it? And it gave them the chance to explore that and really challenge themselves in it.
So we actually started our ministry. So we're Impact Campus Ministry in Evansville, and we started during the pandemic. Like that was our first semester. So we were meeting with students. We had students in our home. And I think the one thing that we realized is, yes, they need vulnerability, but they need authentic vulnerability. They need us to be there, to want to be in their life, not to be that, oh, we're going to be vulnerable for you guys. But they're wondering how to figure stuff out. Like they're wondering what to do with BIPOC, what to do with PI. Like they want to know what we do with the culture that is on fire right now. How do we fix that? And that's what our students have been trying to figure out, and to be able to walk with that and that vulnerability and just be like, we don't know. And to not Jesus stroke them and be like, oh, Jesus is the answer. But really, we're going to figure this out. There's a way. We're going to find that for them. They've absolutely flourished in that.
Great, yeah.
For us, we run a kind of experiential missions ministry where groups come and learn about God's heart for the city, and they got shut down. So March, all our groups canceled. Our year was over with. Our budget of whatever amount became $1,000 for the year. Wow. So it's like, hope I get paid next week. But we had to reformat our whole ministry to online, so we shifted to Zoom, all of that, like you all did, and figured that out. And when we had college students and high school students, one of the things that I saw is that the pandemic caused all of us to grieve, but then in that grief, there was more layers of grief when you had George Floyd happen and all of that stuff. So it was like grief on grief on grief. And it was really crazy because in a way, this ministry that I had just became, a part of in a full-time capacity, and the same with Piper here, we saw how the years of its longevity in talking about issues of justice and race really it was almost like Esther for such a time as this. It was the craziest thing. And for us, it was just really it was challenging, but it also was a blessing because a lot of people, I think, were being awakened to the realities of the brokenness of our nation, but then also they were dealing with it for those who had already been awakened, and they just wanted someone to come alongside with them and ask questions or allow them to ask the stuff that'll get you canceled, right? And so just being able to sit in the uncomfortable questions and thoughts that people have surrounding issues of faith and race and justice, which I just think we as a body, as an evangelical church, have just not done a good job with.
Yeah, I really appreciate that a lot. Sunshine, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. That has been such an important piece for years and years and years, but so critical in this year. I think just students having all of these questions and not knowing what to do with them and not knowing how to process through that. And so I think we had a series of conversations on race that weren't the old white guy talking, but was really inviting African American students to come and share their own experiences, and it was such a vital piece for our community, not just to give voice and agency, but to actually have a space for conversation. We have one of our worship leaders, his name's Jordan. He said, There's nowhere else except the Black Cultural Center where I can have these conversations on campus. And so that is a gift we can give to our campuses, to actually have space for those conversations and to have the right people leading those conversations. And so, yeah.
I think I so much appreciated last year, Rob, your leading at the online E4 conference and that whole session on striving. And I think what I've learned is that the pandemic really was a gift for all of us, you know, if we could see it, because it did shake us, to be able to deal with all kinds of conversations that we kind of, I don't want to say we resisted. I think we just have not had the time to deal with it because we have been so busy trying to keep things going, trying to keep the programming going and all of that kind of thing. And I think what it's taught us all, it's taught me, is to be able to be present, like to invite people into our homes, to invite people into our space and create that Sabbath. And that's really what the pandemic could do for all of us. And one of the things that sounds so simple that I've recognized, at least from a lot of our staff with Impact, is it's like, okay, what do we do? Like, what do we do? And just enter into space to do disciplines with one another. Like that's our MO, to have an intimate relationship with Jesus Christ, to pursue, model, and teach. And have we even been doing that? Like, we've been so busy doing our regular thing that we actually haven't spent time reading the text. We haven't spent time interceding with one another and just being present with one another. And it's out of that, I think, that seed ground, then we're able to, out of that Sabbath space, that we're able to actually wrestle with the things that are really meaningful and to walk with each other through this pandemic. And I think the challenge is going to be coming up as we come up out of it, is to continue to back into that Sabbath space, to continue to make that a rhythm that we have, and not just enter back into a busy culture where we can't, you know, that would be my challenge for all of us, is to receive this as a gift. Receive this as a gift. So,
most of the stuff that I researched was from 2017, 2018, 2019, and then there was this big gap, you know, called COVID year. Although by the end of the year, again, Tim Elmore, I really researched a lot more other people. I think he's just the most quotable. But his most recent book is called The Pandemic Population, which offers actually some parallels. I wrote all the stuff I did about World War II and so on before I got this book. He uses a lot of parallels between the Great Depression and World War II and what's going on right now. And he said basically we can see 2020, the COVID year, as either an interruption or as an introduction to a new era, as it were, a new approach. And I like that. Even last year, in talking about how do we moderate what's going on with the pandemic with our students, at our ministry, our decision was we were not going to let it be the dominant thing. Like, there's this pandemic and we're supposed to follow Jesus. There's this pandemic and we're supposed to love each other. But rather, we are still called to be the people God's called us to be, but there's some background noise, okay? There's a lot of background noise, and last year there was plenty of background noise, the crazy election and all this sort of stuff. But that's not what's dominant. We're still called to love God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love our neighbors ourselves, and so on. And love our neighbors ourselves. We got to seek not just individual sozo, individual healing and reconciliation, but cultural reconciliation, healing, And shalom is never just a personal thing. Shalom is a community thing. And so, yeah, we can't stop talking about racial justice. We can't stop talking about economic inequality. We can't stop talking about sexual oppression. We can't stop talking about those things because there's a bad bug in the air. All right, and it's still in the air, apparently, for new variations and so on. So we can't just shut the door on that and say forget the whole deal because it's ongoing. But this is an introduction into how to continue, how to approach. Mm-hmm. Other suggestions? These are good.
I just have a question, and I'm trying to sort it all out too. But and all of you kind of talked about this a little bit. And there's this link between and Leah, you mentioned it. Just there's just been some mental issues that have just been really hard to deal with, and a lot of that is linked to online screen time. MIT, Sherry Turkle, all these people have done research and said there is a unmistakable direct link between screen time and mental disorders. Does it seem contradictory for us? And I'm just asking you because I don't know. For us, the pendulum keeps swinging. Is it weird for us to say we got to do more online stuff to get them? And Rob, you talked about screen zombies and stuff. We got to reach them somehow, but it just seems weird for us to say we need to do more online stuff when there is a direct link between that and some of the stuff that we're struggling with. I don't know. What do you think? I'm not able to sort it out. So
I think it's a great question. I was telling Dave last night, one of the, positives of this last year is that all of these conferences, including this one, was all online and free. And so a lot of conferences I would never pay, $1,000 to go to, I got to sit in on. And there was one conference, they had, I think, 50 speakers, 10 minutes at a shot, and a lot of it was really helpful, but I would say at least a third of them was around how to have a better online presence and how to make your live streams pop and all of that stuff that's I just kind of have an aversion to anyway, about fog machines and bright lights and stuff, but smoke and mirrors. The two I really appreciated, I was telling him, one was a bit surprising, actually. Kyle Eidelman, Southeast Christian Church. It's just a little church on the outskirts of town here. His talk was on the fact that we don't have a clue what we're doing. And his was a call to humility, which I really, really appreciated. The other one was the guys from Pete Scazzera's church out in New York. Emotionally healthy spirituality, emotionally healthy church, who was a call to get back to spiritual formation and just the simplicity of the gospel. And so those two kind of, the juxtaposition of that we do want to use, and Dave was talking about this last night, that the church has always used the mediums of culture to reach the unchurched, and so it's not wrong, but what is the point, and what are the means, what's the end, and is it about the means or about the end? And so are we contributing to the noise and to the static is a great, great question, which gets back to what we have to be asking, what is the big why, to be thoughtful and mindful. Yeah.
And if Jesus
Hey, Greg. So I work, as you know, Greg, I worked in IT for 10 years before I did this. So the real question I think that's going to help you is it the actual time in front of the screen, or is it the content they're consuming that is causing those problems? And I guarantee you it's the content that they're consuming, because I worked 8 hours a day or more in front of a screen and did not have any issues, nor did my coworkers. So it's not the screen itself. If it was just blue and you were staring at a blue screen all day, would that be worse than someone else who did not stare at a blue screen? They stared, that's not a screen, it's an actual, I don't know, a blue wall. Would they have worse issues, right? And so it's the content. So we, I think, will help people by putting better content that is going to make them healthier, because they're going to do it anyway, right? I mean, it's a method of communication, just like anything else. So for whatever that's worth.
Let me toss a couple things in here, and then we'll keep passing this around. Again, I am an old guy, all right? And I am far more comfortable with cuneiform than online social media, and yet we got to meet people wherever they are. And right now our students are online, and so our ministry is spending more money on social media advertising this year than we ever have. But it's not so that we can engage them online and keep them online. We want to hang out. Jesus said, "Follow me," and they went places and they did stuff face to face. 83% of the millennials say that's what they want. And one of the things I became convinced of this last year, we were struggling. How do we do stuff online? How do we do this? But we're still meeting up with students in parks and things. We took full advantage of the outside, you're safer, and we did a lot of stuff. And we soon figured out that our whole staff could probably spend 12 hours a day, every day, meeting one-on-one with students because they wanted that. So, let's cultivate that. The other side of things that I thought was amusing, I'm an NPR geek, okay? And one day they were talking with a psychologist about why does Zoom make us all so anxious? And the psychologist said, okay, just think about your posture and your relationship to the other faces. When you're on Zoom, you're probably about 2 feet away from other faces. Now, there may be 40 of them, and there may be postage stamp size, but you're still 2 feet away from other faces. In real life, when you're 2 feet away from other faces, you're probably either going to mate with somebody or fight them, both of which are anxiety-inducing circumstances. And if you got 40 faces 2 feet away from you, there's just anxiety there. I believe that. That's now part of my doctrine. But anyway, yeah, we ought to have good websites. Yeah, we need to have social media presence and so on. But our goal should not be, I'm going to have the biggest online congregation ever recorded. Our goal should be, I take people with me and we go do Jesus stuff. And yeah, I'm with you. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Greg, there's so much research out there about mental health and FaceTime or screen time, and part of that is the reasons for that. And screen times and social media causes isolation because of comparison. So we're constantly, if you're on Instagram, it's just a constant reel of comparing my life with other people's lives. And, like you guys were saying, the Gen Zs are almost perfect at modeling the life that they want people to see. And so now they're seeing other lives that look better. So that's where this mental health is coming in. And they're isolating themselves because that's all they're doing, especially during COVID. Like, that's all they were doing was TikTok and Snapchat and all this stuff that's making them isolated. But what we can do is we could use Zoom to not only give them a family to kind of connect them, but kind of take away that comparison that, oh yeah, we're all flawed, we all have this nasty part to us, and that there are good parts of that. I think if we're able to kind of take that and then push that for the good, I really think that we can make screen time a good thing too.
Well, Dr. Jean Twenge is one of the people who's drawn that parallel a great deal. And I like her research a lot, San Diego State University. But one of the things she says is, how can the average Gen Zer make their mental health better get offline and do anything. Anything. Roast marshmallows, go for a walk, read a book, pet a dog. And it just makes this ridiculous list of anything. So, yeah, let's invite our friends away. Let's invite them to this.
That's funny that you said that, because that was a part of the comment that I wanted to make. I'm a middle child, like the middle in between. I'm 34, so I'm not quite the older generation, quote unquote, and then I'm not the Gen Z generation. So like I have probably a little bit of both the traits in different ways. And I think those of you who are, you know, older than 40, 50, right, still serving and running around with college students, you have something amazing to offer, and that you have experiences we just don't have or haven't had. I remember as a Youth for Christ kid going camping for the first time, from the hood, going camping in my late teens, like, whoa, like people ride on hay, you know, and they cook marshmallows, and like, it was just mind blowing to me. It was just all so new and mind blowing. And guess what? Me and my wife bought a house a year ago, and I built a fire pit in the back. I ain't had no fire pit growing up. So, you know, I think there is just such a beauty that you have to offer, that you can actually go back to the old playbook, and some of those things that probably didn't work right before the pandemic, people are starving for, like backpacking and things like that, that, you know, folks just haven't had a chance to experience during the COVID. So there will always be the online component that I think, as churches, as ministers, will never get away from until we're gone. That's just a part of our fabric now. But I think the experiential part and finding creative ways, like you all said, to incorporate that is going to be really a game changer with your college ministries.
And again, it's all a matter of, we got to start with the why. Why are we doing this? Are we doing this, well, because we used to do it and it was good? No, why? Matthew, what time do we need to be done?
On the hour, like 6 minutes?
6 minutes, all right, time for one more.
I was just gonna say one thing that I've gotten to do this year is inductive Bible study. I know lots of you probably do that in your ministries already, but just being able to present it as, this is not just one more thing for you to do this year or this semester. This is not just like, we're going to learn about Hebrews and you need to learn about Hebrews right now. Because I know for me, when I'm in a busy season of life, it's like, well, I'll just, you know, read my 5-minute devotional, and someday later I'll like really dig in, you know? And being able to present it as, I want to teach you this method of studying the Bible, so that when you leave here, you are going to know how to study the Bible. You are not going to have to go buy devotion books and all kinds of things. You're just going to be able to open your Bible and you're going to know how to study it. And I want to teach you that skill, because it's going to last your whole life, and you're going to be able to take it and teach it to other people. And so, I don't know, that just came to mind when you were talking about that idea of, why is this task valuable? And I think showing why are we doing the Bible study, teaching them that it has value, not just for what they're getting out of it right now, but for how they will be able to use it in their own faith journey and within church service in the future.
That's really good. I think part of the responsibility and opportunity that we have, and real privilege, is to give them some tools for the journey, right? And not in a prescriptive way, but in a real invitational way, that as not just mentors and disciplers, but as family, we are introducing them to a deeper intimacy with Jesus. And so to not assume, I mean, it's been said several times, we just can't assume that they know basics about who God is and what Scripture actually says. And so there's something almost novel to it. And those that have grown up in church have gotten, all of the typical youth group stuff, but to really, what they're hungry for across the board is for something that is actually transformative and beyond what they have known and experienced. And so, I think to share with them some ways to be with the Lord, and in a deep dive way, but also in a really devotional, contemplative way, and to really to listen, to be able to listen to the Lord, I think is incredibly valuable. So it's good.
And the really important word you just used was journey.
Yeah.
We are in process. Our kids are in process. Our students are in process. And COVID is a season, however long it lasts. Everything else is a season, but we're in process. And if we have the tools for the journey, as we encounter each new part of the journey, like having kids, as Mark mentioned, God will provide us with what we need for that part of the journey. Can I pray and wrap this up? Father, we praise you so much that some bodies along the way, in most cases, reached out to us. They loved us. They taught us. They shared with us. For some of us, maybe Sunday school teachers at the Sunday school we went to every week. For some of us, a neighbor. For some of us, a friend. But we're here because we were loved and made known about that love in various ways. Father, thank you for this precious new generation of people created in your image, loved by you as much as any of us are. Thank you that Jesus died for every Gen Zer just as much as he died for any of us who are not Gen Zers, but unfortunately a lot of them don't know that yet. Please give us a connection. Please give us presence. Please give us wisdom and overall love. Father, thank you for getting us through this past year, and as much as I sort of hate to admit it, thank you for Zoom and Skype and all that stuff. Thank you for Amazon 2-day delivery so that we can get hooked up to go online. Thank you for masks and fire pits and s'mores and all the things that enabled us to be together in different ways. Thank you for universities that trusted us, and for those that didn't trust us so much, Father, we just pray that you give us better access really soon so that we can get back to providing more means of connecting and loving the students to whom you've given us opportunity for shepherding. Lord, we just want to represent you well. We want your love to be known. We want your glory to be seen. We want your flourishing to be experienced. Father, may we be wise. May we stay connected to each other. May we share the insights we gain. And may we be faithful witnesses to you, to this generation, and the alphas and betas and whoever lies beyond. In Jesus' name, amen.